Hey viewers, my name's Cara. I am actually at the Buckland Museum today. While I am enjoying some quiet time, I thought I would do a video that I was meaning to do this week, and I had a lot of stuff going on this past week, so I just didn't get around to it, but here we are. I want y'all to know, here at the museum, we are still requiring masks for everybody. We never stopped doing that. We are very serious about safety, so I do have this ready. But for the video, I'm not wearing it. That's not normal while I'm here at the museum, but I am alone in the space, and there's a siren outside. In this video, I want to talk about this book that I finally finished reading. This is WICCA, History, Belief, and Community in Modern Pagan Witchcraft by Ethan Doyle White. It was published in 2016 by Sussex Academic Press. The only reason I got a copy of this is because my local public library system had it and they were getting rid of it. My partner is a librarian. They noticed that it was being gotten rid of, and obviously it is my subject area, so grabbed it for me. And actually they were trying to read it first, but they didn't like certain ways of how it was written, which I'll talk about in a second. So it was just passed on to me, and I have been reading it slowly but surely over the past few years, couple of years. I took my time with this one. I was also taking copious notes, as I tend to do when I'm going through a big book of like history and research and studies. So this is an academic book. This is research, it's compiling research that other people have done. Being that I work at a witchcraft museum, it probably makes sense to all of you that this is the kind of thing that I would enjoy and also get a lot of use out of. So I really enjoyed this book. Why did my partner who tried to read it not like it? In the early chapters, what Ethan Doyle White is doing here is going through kind of every step of the history and development of this movement, modern pagan witchcraft, throughout the decades. So the way that some chapters tend to go is like, here's this thing that happened, and this is what people believed at the time. And then something else came out which said that was nonsense, and then nobody believed that anymore. And then somebody else came out and said that other thing was nonsense, and so they didn't believe it anymore. There's another chapter on Gardner and Gardner's early rivals, like the other folks whose views were coming into play at this time, and the critiques that they all had of each other, which goes in a very similar way, right? Where it's like, well, Gardner thought this, and Margaret Murray had written this, but then people thought this instead. These other folks responded to Gardner's work by saying this, but then that person themselves was discredited, and then somebody else said this, but then they're not accepted either. And so my partner kept saying, like, I don't want to know all of the other things that like didn't work out, that didn't end up being anything. Like, I don't want to know about all the other people who tried to do something and then that was kind of tossed aside. I just want to know, like, what's the main story? So I feel like that's a totally valid critique of the type of book that this is. That's just the type of book that this is. So if that sounds like the reaction that you would have, maybe this is not a book for you. This is really an overview of every single thing that was going on, which is exactly the kind of thing that I do want to know. So for me, loved that about it. I didn't have a problem with that at all, but I wanted to mention that because maybe that is the kind of thing that you would not want to read a book about. So I do think this is a very specific audience. It's kind of meant to be an academic read. Let me see, what else can I tell you here? Ethan Doyle White, it says on the back here, is an established scholar of contemporary pagan studies, trained archaeologist, and PhD researcher at University College London, UCL. Like I said, it came out in 2016, so one of the reasons that I really liked this and appreciate that this exists is because it's covering a lot of the history that is covered in other really big history books, really dense history books. But I feel like, although this is still an academic press published book, I feel like the language of this one is more accessible. I don't want to say casual because it still is very like, this is presenting research, but I just feel like it is a little easier to understand. Like, it was an easier read for me in terms of like the language that was being used. So that's one thing I like about this. You know, I don't want to say simple because it's not simple. This is very complex stuff, but it's presented in a more readily accessible way, I think. And also that this came out in 2016, so it's including more that came later after some of those other big books that were published decades ago. Now, when we get past kind of the early basic history and stuff like that, this book really gets into a lot. So it's broken up into different parts. It goes over beliefs and practices, of course. But then most recently, I just finished this book in January of 2022. In January, I read part 3, which is titled Wiccan Life. And then the chapters were about the process of converting to the craft, and it covers the fact that most of us don't like the word converting, the Wiccan community, Wiccan culture, and then the last chapter is called The Study of Wicca, and it is literally just recounting all of the major studies that have been done of what we now call Wicca, this new religious movement of modern pagan witchcraft, and literally just briefly describing all of the different people who have done studies about this thing and like listing them and when they were and what they covered. And the part about like the Wiccan community, it talks a lot about demographics, so using information from previous research and previous surveys or censuses. That kind of stuff is amazing to me. Like, that is all the kind of stuff that I love to know, and so I took a lot of notes for this book. I was taking notes in a college-ruled spiral-bound notebook. I want you all to go ahead and guess in the comments how many college-ruled notebook pages did I fill with notes on this book. Now, to make it a little bit easier, I will give you an idea of how many pages this book is and how many chapters. So there are 18 chapters, plus notes and a bibliography, but I didn't take notes on those. I appreciate when things are, footnoted and there are citations, right? This is academic research stuff, so that's in there. We love to see that. It's less than 200 pages, but I was also taking notes in pencil in the margins of the book while reading it. And then I take notes in a notebook as well, so I underline things like with pencil. So I'm doing that, and then I'm also taking notes. Go ahead and guess. Just guess, how many notebook pages do you think I filled? And then I will either respond in the comments, or maybe I'll mention it in my next video. I don't know, but I think that'll be fun. I will say that it's more than 18 pages. It's more than 1 page per chapter, that's for sure. Maybe the shortest chapters might have only had 1 or 2 pages of notes. Maybe that's a bit of a hint for you, but some of the chapters were quite a bit longer. Some of the chapters are like 20 or more pages long themselves. Yeah, but it covers a lot of stuff. So it covers the same basic history I was about to say, but it's really not, right? Some of it is, some of it's the same basic history, the main sort of milestones that anybody who's researched this stuff before already knows. But it's also a lot more in depth. There's a lot more detail to this, which is what I love. So there was a lot in here that I was like, yes, okay, cool, corroborating things that I already know, making me feel like, yes, okay, cool, I did research and learn about that, but also just so much more. So I really enjoyed this. It took me a long time to get through it. Like I said, I started rereading it in October of 2020, and then I didn't get much back into it until like the summer of 2021, and then I read a lot of it throughout the end of 2021, and then I finished the last part in 2022 in January. I have been talking about this book on and off for quite a while, and I finally finished it. So I wanted to mention that and let you all know. I recommend this book if you like a lot of the things that I tend to talk about. So if you're really into the history, if you're looking for a good, thorough, academic, researched history of this movement, and maybe you want something a little more updated, maybe you want something with a little more of the extra stuff, like I said, like it talks about the other studies that were done, it covers demographics, surveys, if you want more of that stuff, if you want more of the step-by-step of all of the other people whose views were at all part of this conversation, I recommend this book. There are other really big, great history ones, of course, Drawing Down the Moon, Triumph of the Moon, definitely recommend those too. Oh, perhaps I should say also, the only thing that tends to bother me about any books like this, and this is not against Ethan Doyle White in particular, but any books, I am part of the reclaiming tradition of witchcraft, and lots of older books have characterized reclaiming as another tradition of Wicca, when it is not. It is not considered a Wiccan tradition. But, for example, in this book, which is called Wicca, I mean, it focuses on the subcategory of witchcraft that is known as Wicca, the stuff that can trace its way back to Gardner. Even though it focuses on Wicca, it talks quite a bit about reclaiming, and it talks about it as a form of Wicca because he is citing research that was done by someone who was interviewing only a certain community of reclaiming witches at a certain time in history and in a certain geographic location. And those reclaiming witches also identified as Wiccans. A lot of early reclaiming witches were also learning Wicca because it's a really big thing. So I think like it makes sense, and you can be both. So it makes sense to me why they're connected. And I like that it's mentioned in here because I like that more people get to know about it that way. But I feel like there have been a lot of things that talk about reclaiming as a branch of Wicca, including this, that I don't want people to continue to be confused about that. The tradition of reclaiming witchcraft as it is today is not considered a Wiccan tradition. So this came out in 2016. That's pretty newly updated, and you would hope that newer things have that information accurately. But as I say, that's not Ethan Doyle White's fault. He is citing research that was done by a particular person who was interviewing people who did identify themselves as Wiccans as well as reclaiming, but that is not true or representative of the entire reclaiming tradition around the globe. So I do just want to note that because that happens to be my tradition, so I know a little bit more about that aspect of it. I love when reclaiming or the Anderson Ferry, F-E-R-I, tradition are mentioned because I love that they're getting more recognition, and that's something that they are things that I feel very close to now. So I love that they're in there, but I don't love that it seems to be perpetuating that misconception and confusion. We don't consider it a Wiccan tradition, although you can be both. So I'm actually planning on doing another video maybe just about that, but definitely worth a mention here because it is throughout this book. I really enjoyed this book. We love a book with citations and references and a good bibliography. It's an academically researched book. So some of the most useful parts for me have actually been right in the introduction. In the first few pages, I reference this stuff a lot. Difference in terms, witchcraft and Wicca. It also talks about the capitalization of witchcraft and pagan in religious studies to help differentiate modern practices from ancient cultures. So like lowercase p pagan, we're talking about ancient cultures being categorized in hindsight, and capital P pagan is more like the modern resurgence. So I capitalize pagan, witch, and witchcraft myself for my own practice, and then talking about how Wicca has been categorized in many different ways as pagan, as nature-based, occult, magico-religion, and then talking about the characteristics of a new religious movement, having a theology, a system of ethics, festivals, and ritual practices. That is something that I have referenced a lot. Because it's from Sussex Academic Press, I think it's a little bit more difficult to come across. I'm not sure, being that I'm not in academia anymore, I don't usually get a hold of things like this. So, like I said, the only reason I got it is because it was in the library system. So check your local library system. Maybe they've got it so you can read through it, or maybe your local bookstore can order it for you. So thank you so much for watching and or listening to this video. I will see you next time. And until then, don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye. Oh, also, I want to say that recently, the Buckland Museum of Witchcraft and Magic, where I work and where I am right now, was featured in a little piece in The Wild Hunt, which if you don't know The Wild Hunt, it's pagan news. And I was mentioned in this article, and it linked to my YouTube channel. Lyonel linked my YouTube channel. I still can't believe that. So hello, if you're watching this and you came from the Wild Hunt article, this is going to be my most recent new video after that came out. Lyonel, a writer for the Wild Hunts, came to the museum at the end of last calendar year on a day that I was giving tours and just like casually mentioned, oh yeah, I write for the Wild Hunt. And I was like, what? So yeah. Why yes, some people did walk in right at the end of recording that.